The bride's mother wasn't watching the wedding. She was watching me. And when our eyes met across that champagne-filled ballroom, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Recognition. She knew who I was. But that was impossible. I'd been dead for 21 years. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Davion Ashworth stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Denver penthouse, the city lights sprawling beneath him like scattered diamonds. In his hand, an embossed invitation felt heavier than it should. Celestine Beaumont was getting married. The woman who'd walked out of his life 15 years ago when he had nothing but dreams and a failing startup was now marrying into the Harrington fortune. The invitation was elegant, expensive, deliberate. She wanted him there to witness her happiness, or perhaps to prove she'd made the right choice all those years ago. 3 days later, during his weekly volunteer shift at New Horizons Shelter, Davion met her. Marlo Chen sat alone in the corner, reading a dog-eared architecture textbook while nursing a donated Starbucks coffee. Unlike the others, she didn't look broken, just displaced. When their eyes met, she raised an eyebrow as if daring him to offer pity. "That coffee any good?" he asked. "It's lukewarm charity," she replied without looking up. "But it's coffee." Something about her dry wit intrigued him. Over the next hour, he learned she'd studied architecture at CU Boulder, lost her job at a prestigious firm 18 months ago, made a series of bad decisions, and ended up here. She spoke with the measured cadence of someone who'd once belonged to a different world. By the end of his shift, Davion had made an impulsive decision. "How would you feel about attending a wedding with me next weekend? In Aspen?" Marlo's laugh was sharp. "Are you insane?" "Possibly," Davion admitted. "My ex-fiancée is getting married. I need a buffer. You could use a weekend away from this place. And I'll pay you $5,000. She studied him for a long moment, searching for the catch. "What's the real reason?" "I want her to see I've moved on," he said honestly. "Even if I haven't." 3 days of negotiation later, Marlo agreed. But as Davion drove home that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set something irreversible in motion. The Hampton Inn felt like luxury after 18 months on the streets. Marlo stood in the shower longer than necessary, letting hot water wash away layers of grime and shame. When Davion's assistant arrived to take her to Nordstrom, she almost backed out. But the promise of $5,000, enough for first and last month's rent, maybe even a fresh start, kept her moving forward. The personal shopper treated her with professional courtesy, never asking questions Marlo didn't want to answer. By afternoon, she had 3 outfits appropriate for a high-society wedding weekend and a small overnight bag that felt like it belonged to someone else. Over coffee at Linger 2 days later, Davion told her about Celestine. "We met at a startup competition. She was there with her father. I was pitching my company. She saw something in me, or thought she did." He stirred his espresso absently. "Her family hated that I came from nothing. When my business started failing, she gave me an ultimatum. Give it up, take a corporate job, be the man her family could accept. I couldn't do it. So she left," Marlo finished. "So she left." Davion smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. 6 months later, my company turned around. Now it's worth $400 million. "And she's marrying someone else with family money," Marlo said. "That's got to sting. More than I'd like to admit." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? Family?" Marlo's jaw tightened. "Foster care from age 7. Before that." She shrugged. "Blank. The social workers said I was found on a highway, traumatized, couldn't speak for months. They gave me the name Chen because someone thought I might be part Asian. Everything before age 7 is just gone." Davion frowned. "No memories at all?" "Sometimes I get flashes. A woman's voice singing. The smell of lavender. But nothing concrete." She met his eyes. "Does it matter?" "No," he said quietly. "I guess it doesn't." That night, Celestine called. Davion's heart hammered as her familiar voice filled his ear. "I just wanted to make sure you're coming," she said, though they both knew that wasn't why she'd called. "I'll be there," Davion confirmed. "Are you bringing someone?" "I am, actually." The pause stretched too long. "I'm glad," Celestine finally said. "I'm glad you've moved on." Neither of them believed it. When Davion hung up, he sat in the darkness of his penthouse, wondering what the hell he was doing. But it was too late to turn back now. The Tesla Model S hummed along I-70, climbing into the mountains. Marlo pressed her forehead against the window, watching pine forests blur past. The landscape felt both alien and achingly familiar, though she couldn't explain why. "You okay?" Davion asked. "Just thinking," she replied, "about how different my life could have been if I'd made better choices." "We've all got regrets." "Yeah, but yours probably don't include sleeping in a doorway in January." Davion's hands tightened on the wheel. "I slept in my car for 3 months when my business was failing. Showered at a gym. Wore the same suit to meetings until it fell apart." He glanced at her. Rock bottom looks different for everyone, but it's still rock bottom. Something in Marlo softened. For the first time, she let herself believe this weekend might not be a complete disaster. The St. Regis Aspen Resort was absurd, all glass and timber and understated wealth. Marlo's room was larger than some apartments she'd rented. She stood at the window overlooking the mountains, feeling like an imposter in borrowed clothes. The welcome reception at the Velvet Buck Lounge was worse. Marlo walked in beside Davion, acutely aware of every eye that turned their way. Celestine appeared first, gliding over in a cream silk dress that probably cost more than Marlo had earned in a year at her architecture job. "Davion." Celestine's smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating as they shifted to Marlo. "And you must be his guest." "Marlo Chen," she said, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. "Celestine Beaumont. Soon to be Harrington." Something flickered across Celestine's face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. But it vanished before Marlo could name it. Thaddeus Harrington IV appeared at Celestine's elbow, all polished charm and dead eyes. "Welcome to our celebration." His handshake was aggressive. "Any friend of Davion's is welcome here." The implied friend hung in the air like an insult. But it was the older woman standing behind Thaddeus who made Marlo's skin prickle. Vivian Harrington studied Marlo with an intensity that felt invasive, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. "Have we met before?" Vivian asked. "I don't think so," Marlo replied, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "My mistake." Vivian's smile was ice. "You just remind me of someone." Later, someone mentioned the wedding venue, the Harrington Estate, Shadowbrook, built during the mining boom. "It's been in Thaddeus's family for over a century," a guest gushed. "The mountain views are absolutely spectacular." The name hit Marlo like a physical blow. Shadowbrook. The word echoed in her mind, trailing memories she couldn't quite grasp. She excused herself, retreating to the bathroom where she gripped the marble counter and tried to steady her breathing. That night, Davion found Celestine alone on the hotel terrace. "You look beautiful," he said, because it was true. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what?" "Don't make this harder than it already is." She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Inviting you was a mistake." "Then why did you?" "Because I needed to see you one more time. To know if—" She stopped, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. I'm marrying Thaddeus tomorrow. Are you happy?" The question hung between them like broken glass. Celestine didn't answer, and Davion walked away before he could do something they'd both regret. But as he lay in bed that night, he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked at him, like a woman drowning. The shuttles to Shadowbrook wound through mountain roads lined with aspens. Marlo's pulse quickened with each turn. When the estate came into view, her breath caught. The sprawling mansion sat against the mountains like it had grown there, all stone and timber and impossible beauty. But the moment she stepped onto the grounds, everything tilted. The smell of pine, the angle of afternoon light through the trees, the distant sound of water, all of it slammed into her with devastating familiarity. She'd been here before. She knew it with bone-deep certainty. You okay? Davion touched her elbow. You look pale. I'm fine, Marlo lied. It's beautiful. The garden party was already underway. Guests scattered across manicured lawns with champagne and canapes. Marlo excused herself, drawn by an invisible thread toward the eastern edge of the property. Her feet carried her to a renovated section of buildings, simpler structures that didn't match the main house's grandeur. Standing there, she closed her eyes and felt it, a woman's voice singing softly in Spanish, the sweet smell of lavender, warm arms holding her close. The memory was so vivid she could almost touch it, but when she opened her eyes, it dissolved like smoke. Those are the old servants' quarters. Marlo spun. A woman in her 30s with a headset and tablet smiled apologetically. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. I'm Sloan, with Aspen Event Productions. You wandered pretty far from the party. I was just exploring, Marlo said. It's a beautiful property. It is. Though this section has a sad history. Sloane's expression grew somber. There was a fire here about 20 years ago. Several staff members died. The Harringtons renovated afterward, but some people say it's still haunted. The ground beneath Marlo's feet seemed to shift. A fire! Terrible tragedy. But that's all in the past now. Sloane gestured back toward the party. We should get you back before they send search parties. As Marlo walked away, she glanced back at the servants' quarters. Something about them called to her, whispered that she belonged there. But that was impossible. She'd never been to Aspen before. She was certain of it. Wasn't she? Meanwhile, Davion navigated increasingly uncomfortable conversations. Old friends kept asking about Marlo with barely concealed curiosity, and Thaddeus's best man, Quinby Forrester, made it his mission to be as condescending as possible. Interesting choice for a date, Quinby said, swirling his bourbon. Very charitable of you. Davion's smile was razor-sharp. Marlo's more interesting than anyone else here. I'm sure she is, Quinby replied with a smirk that made Davion's fists clench. But as the afternoon wore on, Davion found himself watching Marlo. Something was wrong. She kept staring at the servants' quarters with an expression he couldn't read. Fear, longing, recognition. When she finally caught his eye across the lawn, the question in her gaze was unmistakable. Do you feel it too? This wrongness? This sense that something terrible happened here? And in that moment, Davion realized this weekend was about to become much more complicated than either of them had anticipated. The rehearsal dinner transformed Shadowbrook's grand ballroom into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in silk, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Marlo found herself seated with Thaddeus's extended family, people with compound surnames and casual mentions of European vacations. She was halfway through the second course when the elderly woman across from her gasped. Lenora's girl, the woman whispered, staring at Marlo with wide eyes. The table fell silent. I'm sorry, Marlo said. Cordelia, dear, I think you're confused, another woman interjected quickly, placing a hand on the elderly woman's arm. But Cordelia Harrington, Thaddeus's aunt, Marlo would later learn, kept staring. You have her eyes. Lenora's eyes. I never forget a face. Who's Lenora? Marlo asked, but the conversation pivoted so quickly it gave her whiplash. Someone made a joke, someone else proposed a toast, and suddenly everyone was talking over each other, drowning out her question. After dinner, Marlo found Davion on the terrace. Something's wrong here. What do you mean? She told him about Cordelia's comment, about the servants' quarters, about the persistent feeling that she'd been here before. I know how it sounds, she finished. But I can describe rooms I haven't been in yet. I knew there'd be a gazebo behind the east wing before I saw it. Davion's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. Show me. She led him through the garden to a small gazebo wrapped in wisteria. I knew this would be here. I know if we go inside, there'll be a bench with initials carved into it. MC Ann. She stopped, suddenly dizzy. Davion pulled out his iPhone, typing rapidly. His face went pale in the screen's glow. What? Marlo demanded. 21 years ago, there was a fire here. 3 staff members died. He looked up at her, and his eyes held something between pity and fear. One of them was named Lenora Chen. Her husband was Marcus Chen. They had a 6-year-old daughter who went missing, presumed dead in the fire. Marlowe's legs buckled. Davion caught her, steadying her against the gazebo's railing. Chen was the name they gave me in foster care, she whispered. Because I couldn't remember my own. It could be a coincidence. You don't believe that? No. He didn't. They stood in the darkness, the weight of possibility crushing down on them both. That night, Marlowe dreamed. She was 6 years old, small hands clutching a stuffed rabbit. Smoke filled the air, thick and black. Someone was screaming. Then warm arms lifted her, and her mother's voice, yes, her mother, she knew it now, whispered desperately in her ear. Stay quiet, baby girl. Stay quiet and don't come out until the smoke is gone. Promise, Mama. Promise. Marlowe woke gasping, tears streaming down her face. And for the first time in 21 years, she remembered her mother's face. Morning dawned clear and perfect, the kind of day that belonged in magazines. Marlowe stood at her window, exhausted and shaking. She'd spent the night remembering fragments, her mother singing in Spanish while folding laundry, her father teaching her to count, the sound of their laughter echoing through rooms that looked exactly like the servants' quarters here at Shadowbrook. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the Rose Garden. Marlowe dressed mechanically, her hands trembling as she zipped the pale blue dress Davion had bought her. She looked like a stranger in the mirror. Guests gathered in rows of white chairs, the mountains forming a perfect backdrop. Marlowe tried to focus on the ceremony, but her eyes kept finding Vivian Harrington. The older woman wasn't watching Celestine. She was watching Marlowe with an expression that made Marlowe's skin crawl. When Celestine appeared in her wedding gown, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. She was stunning, ethereal, everything a bride should be. Davion's face went carefully blank, but Marlowe saw his hands clench in his lap. Thaddeus waited at the altar, triumphant. As Celestine walked down the aisle, Marlowe noticed her hesitation, a tiny stumble, quickly corrected. For just a moment, Celestine's eyes found Davion, and the longing there was unmistakable. The ceremony proceeded with traditional vows and readings. Marlowe barely heard any of it. She was too busy noticing how Vivian's gaze never left her, how Thaddeus's smile never quite reached his eyes, how Celestine's voice wavered when she said, I do. At the reception, champagne flowed freely. Marlowe found refuge near the catering tent where Epicurean catering staff bustled efficiently. A woman about her age, arranging past hors d'oeuvres, caught her eye and smiled. Not a fan of the party? The woman asked. Just needed some air, Marlowe replied. I'm Marlowe. Rhiannon. I work most of the events here at Shadowbrook. She handed Marlowe a glass of Veuve Clicquot. You look like you could use this more than the guests. They talked easily, and Marlowe found herself relaxing for the first time all day. Eventually, she worked up the courage to ask, the fire that happened here 20 years ago, do you know anything about it? Rhiannon's expression shuddered. Why? Just curious. My mother worked here back then, Rhiannon said quietly. She was off that night, but she lost friends. She always said. She glanced around, lowering her voice. She always said it wasn't an accident. Marlowe's heart hammered. What do you mean? The Chens, the couple who died. My mother said they were about to go to the authorities about something. Something to do with Harrington Mining's business practices. A week later, they're dead in a tragic electrical fire. Rhiannon's eyes were hard. My mother said everyone who knew anything was paid off. The investigation was a joke. Did she know what they were going to report? Fraud, maybe. Illegal dumping. My mother never got the full story, but she knew enough to be scared. Rhiannon squeezed Marlowe's hand. Be careful asking questions here. The Harringtons don't like people digging into the past. Meanwhile, on the dance floor, Davion held Celestine in his arms for the first time in 15 years. The song was slow, intimate, devastating. I made a mistake, Celestine whispered against his shoulder. Which one? Davion asked. All of them. Leaving you. Marrying him. She pulled back to look at him. Thaddeus isn't who I thought he was. There are things about his family, about this place. Davion, I'm scared. Then don't do this. We can leave right now. I can't. The marriage is already legal. We signed papers this morning. Her laugh was bitter. My father insisted. Binding the families together properly. Celestine. I love you, she said desperately. I never stopped. I just... Don't, Davion said, though his heart was breaking. Don't say things you can't take back. When the dance ended, they pulled apart like magnets forced against their poles. And across the reception tent, Vivian Harrington set down her champagne and made her way toward Marlowe with the deliberate purpose of a woman who'd finally made a decision. Marlowe couldn't sleep. The alcohol, the revelations from Rhiannon, the memories clawing their way to the surface, everything coalesced into desperate need for answers. At 2 a.m, she slipped out of the guest cottage and made her way through the darkened grounds to the main house. A side door, left unlocked by careless catering staff, granted her entrance. Marlowe moved through the silent mansion like a ghost, guided by instinct and fragmented memory. She found Thaddeus's home office on the 2nd floor, recognizing it from earlier when she'd glimpsed it through an open door. The lock was simple. A letter opener from a nearby table did the trick, skills learned from her time on the streets proving unexpectedly useful. Inside, the office smelled of leather and old money. Marlowe worked quickly, searching drawers and filing cabinets. Most were unlocked, containing boring business correspondence. But then she found it, a locked drawer in the antique desk. Her hands shook as she worked the lock with the letter opener, sweat beading on her forehead. The drawer finally gave with a soft click. Inside were folders marked with dates from 21 years ago. Her fingers trembled as she pulled them out. Letters between Thaddeus Harrington III and his lawyers about the Chen situation and eliminating the witness problem. Financial records showing payments to fire investigators, local officials, even the coroner. Hundreds of thousands of dollars changing hands to ensure a tragedy stayed tragic and nothing more. Marlowe pulled out her phone to photograph the documents, her breath coming in short gasps. This was evidence of murder, of conspiracy, of a cover-up that had stolen her entire life. The lights blazed on. Marlowe spun, blinded for a moment. When her vision cleared, Vivian Harrington stood in the doorway. But instead of anger or surprise, the older woman's expression held something else entirely: resignation. Vivian closed the door softly behind her and locked it. I was wondering when you'd remember, she said quietly, moving to the bar cart and pulling out a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle bourbon. She poured 2 glasses with steady hands. You look just like your mother. I should have known the moment I saw you. Marlowe's voice was barely a whisper. You knew who I was. Not at first. But by the time dinner ended yesterday, I was certain. Vivian handed her a glass. Lenora had the same eyes. The same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. You're her daughter, Maria Elena Chen. The name hit Marlowe like a physical blow. Maria Elena. That was her name. Her real name. I died in the fire, Marlowe said numbly. You were supposed to. Vivian took a long drink. Sit down. You deserve to know the truth. Vivian Harrington didn't call for security. She didn't scream or threaten. She simply poured bourbon and began to confess. 21 years ago, Marlowe's father Marcus Chen was an accountant for Harrington Mining. Brilliant with numbers, honest to a fault. He discovered that Thaddeus Harrington III, Vivian's late husband, was systematically defrauding investors. Cooking books, falsifying environmental reports, illegally dumping toxic waste from mining operations to save money. Marcus found millions in hidden accounts and evidence of ecological disasters that had been covered up. He came to my husband privately first, Vivian said. Gave him a chance to make it right. Thaddeus laughed in his face. She stared into her glass. Your mother, Lenora, was Shadowbrook's head housekeeper. She'd worked here for 8 years. We trusted her with our home, our children. And my husband repaid that trust with murder. The fire had been carefully planned. An electrical malfunction in the servants' quarters, accelerated by a gas leak that investigators later ruled accidental. Marcus and Lenora died of smoke inhalation, along with a maintenance worker named David Ortiz who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Your mother knew something was wrong that night, Vivian continued, her voice breaking. She hid you. There's an old root cellar beneath the servants' quarters, built when the estate was first constructed. She put you inside and told you to stay quiet. That's why you survived. Marlowe's hands shook so badly she had to set down her glass. How do you know all this? Because I found you. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. Hours after the fire, when the investigators were still working, I went to pay my respects. I heard crying coming from beneath the burned building. I found the cellar door and I found you, 6 years old, terrified, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Then why? Marlowe couldn't finish the sentence. Why didn't I save you? Vivian laughed bitterly. I tried. God help me, I tried. I pulled you out, wrapped you in my coat. But Thaddeus was there. He saw. And he told me if I said anything, if I acknowledged you'd survived, he'd make sure you didn't live to see morning. He said he'd already killed 3 people. What was one more? Marlowe felt sick. So I did what cowards do, Vivian whispered. I put you in my car and drove you to a highway rest stop 2 hours away. I left you there with a note pinned to your coat that said only, "Please help her." Then I drove back to Shadowbrook and pretended I'd never seen you. You let me grow up in foster care, Marlowe said, her voice hollow. You let me think I had no one. I know. I've lived with that guilt every day. After Thaddeus died 5 years ago, I hired investigators to find you. But you'd been lost in the system, renamed, moved from home to home. By the time I tracked you to Denver, you were already on the streets. Vivian reached for Marlowe's hand, but Marlowe pulled away. I've been watching you for 6 months. When you showed up here with Davion, I thought maybe fate was giving me a chance to finally do the right thing. The right thing? Marlowe's laugh was savage. You covered up my parents' murder for 2 decades. I know, and I'm ready to face the consequences. Vivian pulled a folder from her purse. These are copies of everything in that drawer, plus my husband's journals where he confessed to ordering the fire, plus my own written statement about what I did. I've already sent copies to my attorney with instructions to release them if anything happens to me. Marlowe stared at the folder like it might bite her. Why now? Because seeing you here, seeing you alive and strong despite everything my family did to you, I can't stay silent anymore. I've been a coward long enough. Vivian stood, moving toward the door. What you do with that information is up to you. But you deserve justice. Your parents deserve to be remembered as heroes, not victims of a tragic accident. As Vivian reached for the door handle, it opened from the outside. Davion stood there, hair disheveled, eyes wild. I woke up and you were gone. I thought, he stopped, taking in the scene. Marlowe's tears, Vivian's defeated posture, the documents spread across the desk. What's happening? She remembers, Vivian said simply. And now she has a choice to make. Dawn broke over Shadowbrook in shades of gold and pink, beautiful and indifferent to the chaos unfolding within its walls. Celestine and Thaddeus were supposed to leave for their Bora Bora honeymoon at noon, but Marlowe, Davion, and Vivian had other plans. They found the newlyweds in Shadowbrook's library, surrounded by luggage. Thaddeus looked up from his phone with irritation that shifted to alarm when he saw his mother's face. Mother, what's wrong? We need to talk, Vivian said. All of us. Celestine, still in her traveling clothes, looked between them with growing concern. Davion, what's going on? Marlowe stepped forward, and for the first time in her life, she spoke her real name aloud. I'm Maria Elena Chen. 21 years ago, your husband's father murdered my parents and tried to kill me. The silence that followed was deafening. Thaddeus recovered first, his face hardening into a mask of polished fury. That's absurd. My father would never. There's evidence, Davion interrupted, holding up his phone where he'd photographed the documents. Letters, financial records, witness testimony. Your father ordered the fire that killed 3 people and covered it up for decades. This is extortion, Thaddeus said coldly. You can't prove any of this. Actually, we can, Vivian said quietly. I've already given sworn statements to my attorney. And I'm prepared to testify. Thaddeus turned on his mother, betrayal and rage warring across his features. You'd destroy our family for some homeless woman making wild accusations? She's not making accusations, Vivian replied. She's telling the truth. And I'm done protecting your father's crimes. Celestine sank into a chair, her face pale. This can't be real. Thaddeus, tell them they're wrong. But Thaddeus didn't deny it. Instead, he pulled out his phone. I'm calling our lawyers. This is slander, defamation. It's murder, Marlowe said flatly. You can call whoever you want, but the truth is coming out. You have no idea what you're doing, Thaddeus hissed. My family has lawyers who will bury you. We'll tie you up in court for years. You'll spend every penny fighting us and lose everything. I already lost everything, Marlowe shot back. Your father took my parents, my childhood, my entire life. What else can you take from me? Celestine stood abruptly, swaying. I need to understand. You knew about this. She looked at Thaddeus. You knew your father murdered people? The pause was damning. I found out after he died, Thaddeus finally said. I found his journals. But it was in the past. Bringing it up would only hurt people. Hurt people. Celestine's voice rose. He killed innocent people. He orphaned a child. A child who was supposed to die, Thaddeus snapped, then seemed to realize what he'd said. But it was too late. Celestine's hands shook as she pulled off her wedding ring. I can't do this. I can't be married to someone who would cover up murder. She placed the ring on the desk with a soft clink. We're done. You can't just walk away, Thaddeus said desperately. We're legally married. The contracts are signed. Then I'll get an annulment. Or a divorce. I don't care. Celestine looked at Marlowe. I'm so sorry. If I'd known. You couldn't have known, Marlowe said. But now you do. Now we all do. Thaddeus made one final attempt. Think about this, Marlowe. We can make you a very rich woman. Name your price. 10 million. 20. You'd never have to work again. Never have to sleep in a shelter. You could have the life you should have had. For a moment, Marlowe was tempted. The money would solve so many problems. But then she thought of her parents, of all the years stolen from her, of the truth buried beneath wealth and privilege. I can't be bought, she said. Not anymore. Davion stepped beside her, his hand finding hers. Whatever you decide to do, my legal team is behind you. Holland and Hart will take this case pro bono if necessary. And I'll cover any costs they won't. Why? Marlowe asked. Why would you do that for me? Because it's right, Davion said simply. And because. He hesitated, then pressed forward. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about Celestine or proving anything. I care about you, Marlowe. What happens to you matters to me. Marlowe felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. There would be time for that later. Right now, she had a decision to make. She looked at Vivian. You said you had copies of everything? In my attorney's hands, ready to be released. Then release them. Marlowe's voice was steady. Contact the Colorado Attorney General's office and the FBI. Tell them everything. Vivian nodded, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. Thaddeus lunged forward, but Davion blocked him. I wouldn't, Davion said quietly, and something in his tone made Thaddeus freeze. 3 weeks later, the story broke nationally. The Denver Post ran it first, Harrington mining heir implicated in decades-old cover-up. Then CNN, MSNBC, every major outlet picked it up. The miraculous survival and return of Maria Elena Chen, the murdered whistleblowers, the web of corruption and payoffs that had kept the truth buried for 21 years. 6 months after that, Marlowe stood in a federal courthouse in Denver, testifying before a grand jury. She wore a simple navy suit Davion had helped her pick out, her hair pulled back, her voice clear and strong as she told her story. Thaddeus Harrington IV faced multiple felony charges: obstruction of justice, accessory after the fact to murder. His legal team was formidable, but the evidence was damning. Vivian had accepted a plea deal in exchange for her cooperation, her testimony providing the final pieces prosecutors needed. Marlowe had moved into a modest apartment in Denver's Highlands neighborhood, funded by a victim's compensation settlement. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with a view of the city, furniture from IKEA, plants she was learning to keep alive. But it was hers. She'd returned to architecture school part-time and started working with Davion's foundation, helping other homeless individuals navigate the systems that had failed her. Celestine's marriage had been annulled within weeks. She'd sold her shares in the Beaumont family businesses and started a foundation in Marcus and Lenora Chen's names, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and supporting their families. She and Davion had coffee occasionally, friendly but no longer carrying the weight of what might have been. And Davion and Marlowe? They were taking things slowly. Too much had happened too fast for either of them to rush into anything. But there were coffee dates at Linger, walks through the city, conversations that stretched into the early morning. They'd survived their own kinds of rock bottom and found each other on the way back up. One Saturday morning, 6 months after the trial ended with Thaddeus's conviction, Marlowe drove to Evergreen Memorial Park. The graves were new. Marcus and Lenora Chen had finally been laid to rest properly, their names cleared, their story told. Marlowe knelt between them, tracing her fingers over the engraved letters. "I remember you now," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I remember Mama singing while she folded laundry. I remember Papa teaching me to count in Spanish. I remember feeling safe." The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine and possibility. "I'm going to make sure everyone remembers you too," Marlowe promised. "Not as victims. As heroes. As the people who were brave enough to stand up for what was right, even though it cost them everything." She placed flowers on each grave, lavender for her mother, her favorite. As she stood to leave, she saw Davion waiting by his car, giving her space but making sure she wasn't alone. Marlowe wiped her tears and walked toward him, toward her future, toward the life her parents had died trying to protect. They hadn't survived to see her grow up, but their courage had given her the strength to reclaim her story. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. If this story moved you, it would mean the world if you could subscribe to Choice Story and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried.